If you want to learn about Chiron, we have to get into the myths. So let's go ahead and start it off. Chiron was the son of Philyra, which is like a sea being, and Kronos, aka Saturn. Yes, it was a whole affair, baby. Saturn was being bad as fuck, okay? And Saturn ended up having Chiron, but Philyra and Kronos, aka Saturn, looked at Chiron when he was born and was like, what the fuck is this, right? And straight up abandoned him. Now, the reason why they did is basically Chiron was a centaur. Mind you, there are like a whole line of centaurs that like are just beings, like it's a whole thing. There's a whole line of centaurs that come from Centauros, but there were some times where two different beings were mixed together and they would create centaurs as well, like centaur-like beings, but they weren't like the Centaural centaurs. They were different. The Centaural centaurs were kind of like wild and crazy and like very inappropriate, right? Like Nessus, like the, remember I talked about Nessus? But then there were the other, centaurs who were like Chiron and Pholus, who were intelligent, smart, mannerable, like the fancy centaurs, right? So he ended up being one of the fancy centaurs. But nonetheless, he looked like a centaur. Centaurs weren't really favorable. And so they straight up abandoned that poor baby. Thankfully, Apollo came through, snatched him up, raised him, taught him everything he knew, right? Not everything, but most of the things, right? So this is why Chiron was a healer, an oracle, an alchemist, like a mentor, a teacher, everything. This is why he's the healer. Wounded healer, but healer nonetheless. But because of that, he was a mentor of a whole bunch of different people and was very well loved, very well respected. But just like everyone else, he hated centaurs too. And every time he see a centaur, he would literally square up. Like he did not like them. It was giving kind of self-hate-ish a little bit. But he was just like doing what everyone else did. Like, yeah, we all hate centaurs, right? It's giving a little Uncle Ruckus, but let's continue. So one day he's hanging out with Pholus, a fellow centaur that was like him, like the fancy centaurs. And Hercules, yes, that Hercules. And they had a long day of work and they decided, hey, let's go drink some wine over at this cave, right? So they go over to the cave, drink some wine. Now, soon as centaurs, the other centaurs, the crazy ones, right? As soon as they smell liquor, they wild out. So they smell the wine from far away and was like, yo, someone's getting lit. Let's go and let's wild the fuck out. And they did. They went and found them where the liquor was at. It was literally rambunctious to the point where they was just like pushing in the club, damn near fighting the club, right? And so they're like literally fighting. And so there is literally Pholus, the fancy centaur, Chiron, the fancy centaur, and Hercules fighting a whole bunch of other of the original centaurs that were a little bit wild, right? And so first of all, Hercules got that famous arrow that has like Hydra's blood in it, shooting centaurs left and right? While Hercules is shooting the centaurs, Chiron and Pholus is just fighting, like straight up fighting, right? The other centaurs. Pholus accidentally steps on one of the Hercules arrows, dies. Bam, right there, right? So Pholus down. Now it's, Hercules and Chiron versus the rest of the centaurs. Hercules was so busy shooting arrows, just shooting the centaurs, that he shot Chiron by accident because he is a centaur. So he looked like the other centaurs. Yes. Now, the crazy thing about Chiron is his father is Saturn, aka Kronos. So he's half a god, right? And gods don't die. So this is why he's called the wounded healer. He got shot by Hercules by accident and he had this agonizing pain and there was nothing he could do about it. And he just for weeks lived with that pain. Now the story differs here, but I'm going to tell the shorter version of this. Eventually, he got Zeus's permission to die because he was like, I can't live in this agonizing pain no more. So Zeus hooked him up. There's different versions of the story. We can get into that later, but Zeus hooked him up. And what ended up happening was to commemorate him, they made him into the constellation of Sagittarius. So how Sagittarius looks like a centaur, and that's their kind of like archetype is kind of like connected to that centaur energy. It's Chiron. It's not any centaur, it's Chiron. That correlates with Sagittarius being really into the arts and traveling and learning and different languages and things like that. It's that's that Chiron energy. So some will be like, okay, I understand why he's the wounded healer, but why is this to childhood wounds? Well, think about it. The first wound he had was his parents neglecting him just because the way that he looked. Didn't know nothing about him. Didn't know nothing about him at all. He was just born. He just got neglected by his parents. So that is the first wound that he actually received. And that wound is because he was, half a sea creature, half a god. But because he was a god, he was different from the other centaurs, right? And so he turned that natural ability that he had to be one of the best healers of the world, in the Greek and Roman world. So that's why it's connected to childhood wounds, but also potentiality, because this person's able to take that wound that they had. They had that wound not only because they were abandoned, but because they were an illegitimate child and looked different, right? But they turned that wound into something beautiful and ended up being the best healer in the world. So this is why it's connected to childhood wounds, potentiality, and also some astrologers use it as a career indicator as well. So that is the whole myth of Chiron, and that's why Chiron represents Chiron. And, how about this? If you want me to, I could talk about the elements of like what they mean for each element. I have a pre-recorded audio of Chiron and all the houses and all the signs, right? And how about you go where you're supposed to go, right? You know where to go. How about you go where you're supposed to go and look and read that? It's a general reading of Chiron in a specific sign, Chiron in a specific house. You pick your sign, you pick your house. I got you. I'll send it off to you. And I think it will help you. So if you want to dig deeper into that childhood wound, understand it, understand why it happened, and dig deep into your potential within it and how that shows an actual gift that you have, go ahead and check it out. Over there. Right there. Thanks, guys.